afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's webinar, UC Mythbusters, Is Everyone Talking About the Wrong Things?, brought to you by Enterprise Connect, AVST, and United Business Media, LLC. I'm Eric Kraft, co-chair of Enterprise Connect and editor of NoJitter.com, and I'm your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. This webinar is designed to be interactive between you and the presenters. Later in the program, we'll ask for your feedback. This webinar event contains audience polling. The polling questions will appear in the presentation window. Please complete the polls when they appear, and thanks in advance for your participation. You can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during the presentation. Just type your question into the Ask a Question text area below the media player, then click the Submit button. We will answer as many questions as time permits after the presentation. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You may also download a copy of the slides by clicking on the Download Slide button located below the presentation window. At this time, we recommend you disable your pop-up blockers. If you're experiencing any technical problems, please visit our webinar help guide by clicking on the Help link below the video window. In addition, you can contact our technical support helpline, which is also located in the webinar help guide. If you're having problems with slides advancing, press your F5 key to refresh your console. Now on to the presentation. UC Mythbusters, Is Everyone Talking About the Wrong Things? Discussing today's webinar will be Michael Finneran, Principal of DBRN Associates, and Hardy Myers, President and CEO of AVST. I'm going to turn things over to Hardy. Michael and Hardy are going to be discussing together some issues around unified communications. This is obviously a topic that everybody's dealing with, and I think they've got some very interesting, fresh new data that's just out from some market surveys, and also some very interesting perspectives on the kind of things you should be looking at as you migrate to UC. So I'll turn it over to Hardy and let you guys go from there.
Thank you, Eric. Well, first of all, we appreciate the opportunity to give this webinar, and we're honored to have both Eric and Michael Finneran join us today. As Eric mentioned, Michael has just completed a survey, and it's got a lot of very interesting data relative to the UC market in it, and looking forward to a great conversation today. If we could go to the slide on AVST, please.
Okay. All right, there we go.
Thank you. So for those of you that don't know, AVST is a worldwide developer of unified communications software and interoperability solutions. We're celebrating our 30th year in business this year. We're founded in Seattle in 1982, and we support over 15 million users worldwide, including many major enterprises worldwide. Eric, please, the next slide. Our focus is in three core application areas: mission-critical voice applications, of course, mobility, and business process integration. And then on the platform side, really where we excel is supporting enterprises as they move towards a centralized cloud-type architecture, and hardening that architecture, and of course, maintaining a highly interoperable, if not the most interoperable architecture on the market. We're known worldwide for our scalability and also the resiliency and the quality of the applications. Eric? Okay, so this is our first of our Mythbusters. UC, what's in the name? And so on the first slide here, Eric, if you want to jump to the first slide. This is the question, and I'm sure Eric will appreciate this one. What industry are we in? And of course, as many in the audience know, when we started, and of course Eric being part of the BCR and then Enterprise Connect team knows, back in the early 2000s, it was really called Enterprise Communications. It is then, of course, evolved into Unified Communications. We added a second C on that to be called Unified Communications and Collaboration. Recently, there's been a lot of focus around just collaboration. That has now turned into business communications and collaboration. And recently, I've seen many of the industry participants just calling it business communications again. So I wonder, and I'd be curious to get Mr. Finneran's input on this. Maybe we'll be calling it enterprise communications again in a year or so.
Well, I hope not, Hardy. Welcome everyone, and to AVST and no Jitter. Thanks for having me. But what those UC really made is it utter confusion or utter confusion and chaos. Frankly, I've never really been fond of the name UC. It just doesn't draw up any real strong images for me. But my basic tack on it is, it's what we have, so let's use it. I don't like the idea of moving back to business communications because really with UC we've moved on to a completely different paradigm for how communications will be done. I always look at UC as a new set of communication and collaboration tools that are required based on the new way that business is conducted. If UC is what we want to call it, fine, but the only worse outcome I could think of is if we allowed each one of the vendors to come up with their own terms to mean the same thing for various marketing imperatives. But in terms of the expanding definition from UC to UC and C, basically, I look at that simply as a product of the expanding vision of unified communications. The original term seems to have grown out of the idea of unified messaging, and we realize that we're not just unifying our inbox. Now we're also unifying our text, email, voice, and ongoing video and collaboration tools. This is a much bigger thing than we're looking at coming out of the box. And certainly, aiding collaboration in the mix. I heard a comment from John Chambers some years back that he too was confused with the term unified communications, but everyone seemed to know what collaboration stood for. Of course, that's not going to be the end of it. We are now expanding it to UC and C plus SN for social networking. So the scope of UC continues to expand. Of course, that moves to social network was really pioneered, I'd say, by IBM. But certainly Cisco is getting on the bandwagon now, having changed the name of Cisco Quad to WebEx Social. And certainly Microsoft's acquisition of Yammer, with what looks to be the view of improving the life experience we could have in SharePoint. So UC is what we call it. It's, I just look at it as the best name we've come up with for the next generation of business communication solutions.
I think that's a great way to say it. And if we can go to the next slide, I think, Michael, this highlights what you were just saying, which is in Gartner's most recent report on the hype cycle on unified communication and collaboration, they cited 37 different technologies that make up UC and C, of which 14 new ones were added in 2012. So it clearly is a market where it's made up of multiple and evolving technologies. Of course, you would agree that it's rapidly mobilizing. And the net of this is, obviously, interoperability is really a key cornerstone. The takeaway for you on this is that interoperability needs to be the key, one of the key cornerstones of any enterprise UC strategy from AVST's perspective.
Absolutely, and the certainly with the survey that Eric had referenced before. But by the way, that was conducted by Webtorials, and will soon be up on Webtorials' homepage. And I do recommend reading. It has some very interesting insights, some of which I'll be sharing with you along the way here. But in terms of the top technologies, we have a lengthier list later. Voice, unified messaging, web conferencing, presence, all scored very high. We're very surprising when we found, though, in terms of the new technologies, the votes for desktop video conferencing outweighed those for room-sized video conferencing 2-1. What do you think about that, Hardy?
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. Michael, let's move on to the next slide. I think this is a worthwhile slide just to sort of center everybody's attention. So, definition of UC, this is, my perspective on it. It's really, and I'm sure, again, given your focus on mobility, it's location and device independent communications integrated with information and context to optimize business processes. As you know, and I think since you're part of the UC Strategies team, I sort of have taken that their definition, and expanded a little bit to include some elements that we see as being important, specifically around location and context. But then, as importantly, and I think this is another area we're going to talk about in just a minute when we get to the cloud, but your survey clearly validates that the models are evolving for how people are going to acquire UC technology. And that being said, obviously the cloud, from this recent survey, is a very, very important element for any vendor, and clearly is a very critical evaluation point for any person, or any enterprise acquiring UC technology.
Yeah, and we'll get back to the cloud issue in a moment because we've got some very good numbers relating to that. But one thing that struck me here was the importance of interoperability. A number of the questions we asked in the survey dealt with what is your current arrangement for UC or enterprise voice or whatever versus what are your goals longer term, and one of which was the issue of a single vendor with a proprietary solution versus multi-vendor UC deployments. For the future, we found that 60% of users were anticipating a multi-vendor deployment. Of course, 35, that left 40% over, but 35% of those remaining said, yeah, they'd like a single vendor, but the single vendor should be standards-based, which seems to indicate that they are looking at some degree of multi-vendor interoperability. So at the end of the day, what we're seeing from our survey is that only 5% of respondents are looking long-term at a single vendor proprietary implementation of UC. So I think you're dead on with your point with regard to multi-vendor interoperability, Hardy.
Good. All right, let's move on to the next slide. And this is a survey from 2012, and I'll cover these points. And then, Michael, would you compare and contrast these to your survey, which I think did you release yesterday, or it's releasing tomorrow?
It will be up on the website momentarily. It's
okay, great, good,
but soon.
And I highly encourage all the audience to access that survey. It's a really great and very relevant data for purposes of evaluating your UC strategy. So this particular survey surveyed 1,000 plus CIOs. In this particular survey, 61% are investing in UC to boost productivity. And again, 2/3 are implementing over the next 3 years. And in this survey, 43% were coming at it from the telephony side versus the email side. So no big shift to the cloud yet, but there's a 25% are favoring a hybrid type approach, which we're going to talk about when we get to the cloud in a minute. And major obstacles, obviously cost being a significant one, and as equally importantly, integrating UC with their existing infrastructure, and then of course also lack of expertise integrating all these technologies. And that's an area we see as far as AVST over the past few years has continued to grow in support of our channel, frankly, and support of our customers, our professional services organization, because of the complexity of the environments we're going into and the objectives that customers are trying to accomplish, which is to take a lot of really heterogeneous infrastructure and move it towards centralized solutions. That requires a very unique set of skills, and the channel has continued to move forward with that as well as the vendors. So it's there's a lot of progress been made over the last 2 or 3 years in that area, and obviously more to come. And then ease of use is, as we all know from the iPhone era, if you will, ease of use is critical to any type of UC applications. And then security is a top criteria for vendor selection. Michael, did you want to compare and contrast that to yours?
Yeah, well, we kind of asked the question in a different way. Essentially, we asked, what factors did you take into account in computing your ROI for a UC investment? But we did find that, and we allowed multiple answers in that one, but 50% of the respondents, close to your 61%, did identify productivity gains. Of course, we found a lot more practical ones there as well. About 55% were talking about reducing travel expenses. 53% were looking at conferencing expenses. So certainly that last C in UC and C, the collaboration part, is a big thing of what the CIOs are looking at today. Back to you, Hardy.
Actually, go ahead. I was just going to interject a quick question to both of you guys with the surveys and just the observing customers and looking at ROI. Is it common enough that enterprises actually do go back and measure the ROI? I mean, everybody kind of talks about why they get into it, but sometimes we hear the idea at Enterprise Connect that people don't go back to see if they actually captured those savings or productivity gains that they were expecting.
Well, we in this survey, we did not ask if they'd gone back, but we did find that I think it was 88% of organizations did an ROI analysis going in, but we didn't ask about the after the fact. I'm actually starting on another survey now with Information Week on their tack on unified communications. And that is one of the questions. So the next time we do that, I might have a good answer for you.
Okay. I would echo that, but I would also add that clearly there some of these harder dollar ROIs, particularly when you're talking about taking discrete systems or hardware-based solutions and moving them into software-based solutions, are pretty locked down, Eric, from the beginning. You kind of know what it's going to be when you end up.
Right.
And so that's pretty easy to measure, therefore. But I do agree with you that that would be a great thing for Michael's survey to ask, or Information Week survey to ask that question, or those questions. The other thing I would just comment on is one of the surprises is, because a lot of cases we see a lot of enterprises with a lot of legacy infrastructure, where the maintenance, they've owned it for quite a while, and the maintenance is relatively economical for the technology, that when they start to refresh their infrastructure, one of the areas that we've seen multiple times, to your point about measuring afterwards, that seems to be a surprise is the cost of the ongoing support, which in the software case is not only the actual maintenance, but it's also the software assurance. So that's an area, when people are doing their evaluations, we would recommend that it's very, very important that you map that cost out, and also what's the refresh cycle on the new technology, because for a lot of customers who have had, as I said, gear installed for many, many years, it's worked really well. When they go to, refresh it, they're not expecting, and in many cases this is what occurs, a hardware refresh every 3 years or every 5 years, because in their mind it's a, 8, 7, 8, 10-year cycle. So just when you're doing that, just go in all eyes open and make sure that you have all those pieces mapped out in your ROI calculations would be my recommendation.
That's great advice.
So on the next slide, and I think Michael would agree with this, regardless of what you call it, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do here is really cost-effectively improve productivity through enhanced or unified communications. And we at AVST, and I think this is a great way for you guys to think about this, and part of this is because our roots go all the way back to the beginning of the communication industry. We look at this in 3 different areas, and specifically there's individual productivity improvements, for example, unified messaging, which enables a worker to be more responsive by unifying his streams of information. There's work group or collaborative type applications. Some of the social stuff you're seeing now really is around improving that productivity. And then, of course, there's enterprise productivity enhancements, and those are everything from centralizing infrastructure to reduce costs to as simple as aggregating calls through a single point and then routing them out to the right person. So these are the 3 areas we suggest that you focus on, but at the net, at the bottom line, the theme here is that the goal of this is always to improve, productivity. Next slide, please. I think we have a question.
Yeah. At this point, we've got a polling question that we'd like to push out to you folks in the audience and ask you to tell us what your primary driver is for deploying UC, giving the choice of gains through mobile productivity, productivity in the office, required infrastructure upgrades like Hardy was talking about a minute ago, or trying to improve your business processes. We'll give you a couple minutes to give us your answers, and while we're hearing from you and waiting for everybody to make your selection, I want to kind of ask you guys, when we talk about improving business processes, and that's we hear the acronym CEBP, Communications Enabled Business Processes, and I wonder if for anyone who might not have really been exposed to that a lot, what we're talking about there.
Sure, and I would add a comment here on this, that what we've seen, and I think where we need to go as an industry on this, is there's been a lot of sort of discrete, and we're going to talk about a couple of them in a minute, but there's been a lot of discrete sort of CEBP solutions, one-off type things where where individual enterprises are finding an area where they can connect better communications with information, and as we all know, information is the oil of the 21st century, and to try to speed up or improve processes. And I think the thing that we're focused on at AVST, and I think something that we as an industry need to focus on, is how do we deliver vertical-specific sets of solutions. So, for example, for healthcare, higher ed, or state and local government areas that we have a lot of focus and strength, and that's what we're focused on. Is because and not to genericize it too much, but a lot of institutions and higher learning have similar problems, and if we can figure out a common set of business process integration solutions that we can then, bring to, hundreds of customers. We think that's a really great way to speed up this part of the UC value proposition, and this part where there's really, from my perspective, I'm sure Michael would agree, there's just some great ROI.
Yeah, well, let me. I'll let Michael put in your thoughts about that as I push out the results. There, you all can see. Looks like office productivity kind of is the number one answer. Michael, I don't know if you had a comment either about what Hardy was saying, or about either of you guys about the results you see here.
Yeah, this lines up pretty well, actually. Though personally, given my predilection toward mobile solutions, I'd be looking at mobile productivity gains. People who are out of the office dealing with a smaller screen, more intermittent communications, and already the stresses of being on the road, I think can benefit the most by a well-designed mobile unified communication solution. In terms of business processes, well, I have more to say about that later, because that's an area I've worked in for quite a while now.
Okay. Well, everybody's had a chance to look at that. If you guys want to move on, we'll.
Yeah, we're ready. From the next.
We'll go ahead. And
okay, is a single vendor suite in my future? Okay, so if you could go on to the next slide, please, Eric, beyond the cover slide. And so my comment on this one is, I think, and I think the Gartner reference highlights this. It was obviously technology specific, but with each new technology comes a whole new set of vendors that are entering this space, and it's frankly it's the incumbent telephony vendors, the traditional telephony vendors. It's people like Microsoft and IBM coming from the collaboration and the email side. We're now seeing Oracle and people with coming from the data side, if you will, and then of course we're seeing people from the network side like BroadSoft and people like that emerging as players in the market. So it is rapidly growing and very rapidly evolving market. Michael, did you have any comments on this slide?
No, just let's continue on. I do have a couple of notes on the following one, though.
Okay, let's move on to the next slide. And this is interesting data from the survey, the one that I was referring to, the IDG survey. They asked when each one, remember this was 1,000 plus CIOs, and they asked to name up to 10 vendors who they considered UC and C thought leaders. And this is very consistent, I think, Michael, with your data that Cisco and Microsoft captured, significant market share, and Avaya, of course. But they also mentioned over 24 other vendors, and then 30% selected none. And the none is the part of it that I find to be most intriguing, which is that, this is a very disparate space. There's a lot going on, and I think that, there's, from my perspective, from AVST perspective, that really portends well for emerging players like AVST in the market who have an opportunity to, carve out a niche in the market and to help enterprises move forward with their UC solutions.
Yeah, that's one of the things that always kills me about surveys. If when you get the answer either none or other, you really like to find out who they're thinking of. And certainly AVST or even somebody like Interactive Intelligence could wind up in the non-listed vendors here. But I'd be really interested to find out if they were thinking about companies like SAP or Oracle or McKesson or Cerner who are integrating communications into their line of business applications. But we did ask a similar set of questions and in a much more granular fashion in the webtorial survey. Basically, we asked who they thought were the leaders in various applications: enterprise voice, unified messaging, IM presence, collaboration, video teleconferencing. And what we saw, pronounced today and more so looking toward the future, was this is breaking down to a 2 or 3 horse race, with the 2 horses being clearly Cisco and Microsoft, as you mentioned. Actually, the top 3 vendors for unified communications we found, for enterprise voice, currently are Cisco, Avaya, Microsoft. When we asked them their plans for the future, it was Cisco, Microsoft, Avaya. Microsoft actually passed Avaya. So but certainly when we looked through all the different specialties, the only place that variation we saw in that was we got to video teleconferencing. Polycom, who of course sells through any number of the UC vendors, grabbed one of the top 3 spots when we talked about video teleconferencing. So there certainly seem to be 2 or 3 names that are pulling to the fore here.
Yep. And again, I think that I'm sure you would agree that the key here is most enterprises are focusing on a couple of anchor vendors, and then they're sort of filling in the gaps or rounding out the solution or getting interoperability from several other vendors, and that's the way we see it clearly in the in our fairly broad perspective from an enterprise access standpoint as well.
Yeah, as you'll see on the next slide, at Webtorials, we not only asked about who is the top vendors, we also asked about which were the most important functions, which gave us some really rich territory to start comparing. If this is the biggest function, who's the biggest player in that part of the market? And is typically the case, the enterprise voice came out on top. These percentages you'll see add up to more than 100. We only put the responses up to 20%. We allowed each respondent up to 5 answers. I always like questions like that because if you have a long list, because it makes people choose, is this more important than that? But enterprise voice was picked by 54%, which of course also means that 46% didn't count voice as a top function of UC. Of course, we never know how to interpret that. It might just be that they assume the enterprise voice is going to be there, so they focus on the other things. And of course, unified messaging usually comes in close to the top. As mentioned, video conferencing at the desktop outweighed video conferencing with room size systems better than 2 to 1. But there's a lot of the collaboration stuff, web conferencing, a couple of surprises, the mobile clients for smartphones, which we do not see used widely today, tied for 5th with Presence, which I always look at as one of the cornerstones of unified communications. Audio conferencing is still in there. Some of these will get down to the smaller ones. We were thinking, for example, cell phones. My take on that one is, well, either it means that we're still going to be looking at desk phones in a UC deployment, or everyone knows that every UC solution comes with a cell phone, so it's not going to be a top function to focus on. They can look at the other stuff. But in terms of the deployment stuff, the other real interesting statistic we pulled up from the survey was that 21% of respondents claim to have a full UC deployment today and 57% a partial deployment, which means that 78% of the folks who responded to our survey had at least some amount of UC capability already deployed, and only 6% had no plans for UC deployment. So,
of course, I guess if enterprise voice was the top function, significant chunk of those guys, if that's what they've been focused on for the last couple of years, would be checking yes anyway, right?
Yeah. Well, we have another survey question later about who's the primary driver for UC, and I'm waiting to see what we hear from the audience, because we asked that same question in the Webtorial survey.
I'm very curious to hear that.
Okay. I'd like to ask you guys just real quick what you make of video conferencing at the desktop ranking so high, because that was what jumped out at me too. It's what do you think enterprises just are getting ready to make the jump on that?
But personally, the way I took it was they already have room-size systems done. They've got them working. If they're looking toward the future, one of the big things they want to bring into the picture is increased use of desktop video conferencing. So I think when I read this, I took it as, well, they just assume the room-size system is there. Let's look at the new things. What would you think, Hardy?
Don't you think with the new technology coming out, with the scalable video codecs and all that stuff, that it's starting to become a technology that actually works really well? And given the whole iPhone experience too, with with the video, your sort of personal video conferencing, don't you think more people are starting to see that as valuable in certain cases?
It's I think it's highly generational. Us older guys just don't like to see ourselves on TV. We're conditioned to see professionals on TV. When we see amateurs, and particularly when that amateur is you, it's a real depressing experience.
Eric, I would also add that comment that it does appear to be generational. That there seems to be, it's very natural for the millennials to just, go right to video. So,
but I think one of the real key capabilities we're going to see coming to the fore today, now that LTE networks are readily available, is do you see what I see? So essentially, allowing people to share the experience they're having by holding up their smartphone while they're on a conversation and letting the other party see exactly what they're looking at. We've got some good industrial applications for that, but I think the ability to share that real-time experience on video, I think, is going to be way more important than just showing a picture of your mug.
Yep. Okay. Great. Moving on to the next slide. This is just a shameless plug for AVST, so we can move on through it. But this does highlight the fact that, as I mentioned, one of our core competitive advantages and why enterprises choose AVST as part of their solution is our ability to integrate not only with whatever their legacy infrastructure is, but integrate with the new and emerging technology they're embracing in UC as well. Eric, should we move on to the next one? So this is an interesting one, and I will say, given the focus around cloud, and I know we're all clouded out, if you will, from the standpoint that it's become sort of a standard term now. The real question here is the public cloud an all-or-nothing decision? And Eric, if you could move to the next slide, I think that the point that we want to make here from the AVST perspective, and I believe really from the industry perspective, is that the evolution of the enterprise adoption of cloud is going to be a hybrid scenario. And a hybrid scenario means they're going to have some of their UC technology deployed on-prem or in a private cloud type environment, and then they're going to add and or deploy certain applications in the cloud. And even if as a vendor, we're seeing opportunities to get our technology to our customers by delivering solutions in the cloud in a more efficient and effective manner. So, the benefits of both are right there on the slide, and clearly there are certain applications and certain functionality that's mission critical that they may choose to. I'm saying they as an enterprise may choose to have behind the firewall, and then on the public cloud side, of course, it's all the benefits of the cloud of the public cloud on demand or SaaS type applications that you get with that. Michael, did you want to add any comments on that?
No, just we got some good data on that, which we have on the next slide about.
Let's move on to the next slide. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, current and future plans for both enterprise voice and unified communications. Looking at I hope everyone else's image is a little bigger than the one I have here, because I'm having a hard time reading it. But you can see currently in enterprise voice, it's 71% is on-prem. Which means 29% is either hybrid or fully cloud-based. Of course, looking toward the future, that premise-based solution drops to 42% and some degree of cloud. Because if you add the hybrid and pure cloud together, you get 57%. But it's even more dramatic. Yeah.
What is the time frame on future, by the way? Did you guys define that?
No. We just, I would say, given the way we worded the question, it is current planning horizon. Standing where you are now, where do you think you're going to be in the defined future?
Okay.
So I'd probably say 2 years.
Okay.
But for unified communications, it's even more pronounced. Currently at 65%. Though for the future, when you add the hybrid and fully cloud together, it's 70%. So certainly with 57% of enterprise voice and 70% of unified communications using at least some portion or deploying at least some portion of their seats in the cloud, I think the cloud move is key, and in each one of the categories, hybrid is leading the way.
Yep.
Also, how they pitch out, we're already starting to see the picture taking shape, and that when I'm talking to current clients, where it appears that big sites are going to remain on-prem. That'll be the more cost-effective approach. But the smaller sites are more likely to wind up in the cloud deployment. So we'll see if that picture holds on.
Yep, that would be very consistent with what we've seen, and of course, as I mentioned in higher ed as an example, we saw institutions start deploying email in the cloud first, adopting Gmail for the students, and then starting to adopt cloud-based email solutions for the faculty and staff, as an example, as one of the first sort of hybrid type scenarios that we're referring to it, I should say. Mm-hmm. So the next slide, I think, is a great slide. That really highlights what we think, and I think Michael, I think you're quoted in your survey saying, in your analysis, saying hybrid deployment is the preferred approach to UC in the future, and I would just put forth the position that hybrid is the future of enterprise UC. So, and I think the data really points to that. That as you pointed out, both in UC and enterprise voice, better than a third of the market's going to be hybrid, with another third going to be in the cloud, which is quite significant.
And it looks like we have another polling question from Eric.
All right, I will push that out, and we're asking folks, what UC components do you think you are most likely to deploy first in the public cloud. Voice, enterprise voice, and that being your main call control, your email, conferencing, or business apps, CRM, or none at all. And we'll give you all again a minute to answer the poll. We talked a little bit about before we came on here. We were talking about kind of doing email in the cloud and the options that people have now. Whether it's we were talking this week has been IBM's what used to be Lotusphere. Now it's called IBM Connection. IBM Connect event, where obviously IBM has been looking to move the notes to the cloud. Enterprises are starting to hear from Google. Google's trying to sell them cloud-based Gmail accounts. What do you guys see in email?
So we just the answer is so far we've created an operability to both Gmail and Office 365, Microsoft's cloud-based email solution. IBM, I think, is coming out with the cloud-based notes here, the latest version here shortly. As you said, Eric, I was very impressed with what they've done and what they're doing with notes, both from just moving to the cloud standpoint and, of course, the IBM infrastructure supporting the cloud, but also on top of that, their connectivity to their connection social software and their same time, unified telephony software, so their presence and real-time telephony software. So it was a very impressive set of solutions, and I think it really speaks to the fact that, again, based on the validity of the numbers we just showed you, that there is a lot of movement not only from the vendors but also from the customers to the cloud.
Michael, do you have any thoughts about Google and Gmail? They seem to be, every once in a while you'll hear about some big user, maybe some government moving to Gmail, but then it doesn't seem to quite have completely gain the share you might think, considering the pricing that they talk about.
I mean, it's unseating Microsoft, who's dominant with the exchange in the email space today, is going to be extremely difficult. Most because Microsoft, to a much greater degree, I'd say, than Google, at least currently, has done a much better job of integrating all the various Office tools together. And now that bundle would also include Microsoft Link. So for a better all wrapped up in time with a bow solution, I think Microsoft's going to have the inside track for some time to come. But a lot of crafty folks there at Google, and certainly the price is a lot more attractive. So if it's a price buy, Google's got a much better shot. If it's an integrated experience buy, then my money's still on Microsoft.
With that, I'll push out the polling results here. You can see conferencing leading the way here, and followed by email, enterprise voice. I'll turn that over to you guys to discuss as you want, or move along when you're ready.
Well, the conferencing isn't surprising because when you look at vendors like Intercall and Premier Global and the other conferencing suppliers, a lot of conferencing started. The big conferences are in the cloud today, and one of the things we were looking at, one of the low-hanging fruit, as we call it in UC, comes from bringing a lot of that conferencing service business in-house rather than paying out money for it. But enterprise voice, 27% of enterprise voice moving out. That's impressive. Certainly the cloud-based suppliers like your 8x8s and, of course, all the suppliers of Cisco HCS should be drooling over that number.
Yeah, we've seen actually a relatively high degree of interest in cloud-based call control, specifically in higher ed as an area. We've seen it. Some not so much in healthcare, state and local government, but clearly higher ed, who seems to be kind of on the cutting edge in a lot of areas. There's BroadSoft's been very involved in that I've seen. In fact, we've done a couple of large universities already where we are interoperating with call control from a large vendor like Verizon or somebody like that, which is based on either I think it's the BroadSoft technology. So some very interesting things. I think that validates really this whole concept of the hybrid from what I can see. Okay, should we move on to our next myth? CEBP, communication-enabled business process. Is it fool's gold? And Eric, you brought this up before. If we can move to the next slide. I won't go into all the details. It's kind of a fun slide, but the point here is that every day we're creating 2.5 quintillion bytes of data. So big data is big, obviously, and the key here, and everyone is focused on this, I think, from an enterprise standpoint, is how do we, tap this river of data to best run our businesses. And frankly, our perspective, again, as a unified communications vendor, is about obviously leveraging the integration of communications with the data through, and by doing that, improving business process. So if you go to the next slide, clearly the goal here is to take this large amount of information and these very complicated business processes, and through the integration of enhanced communications, improve customer relationships and make informed decisions. And if you go to the next slide, clearly from a top priority today's organizations, highest priority cited by 48% of surveyed CIOs was to make business processes more efficient. It's interesting that didn't show up quite as high in your survey, Michael. But I think Gartner does a nice job on this. They say the delivery of effective business processes is arguably the most powerful outcome that IT can deliver to any organization. So, I believe that this is one of the areas of unified communications that's, we as a industry and enterprises need to put more focus into. I can tell you from active conversations with hundreds and hundreds of customers, it's typically the area, it's not the lowest of hanging fruit, but when they get into it, it becomes really a powerful point for a UC, if you will, deployment to really get some traction. So I think, Michael, you've got a couple of examples here on the next slide that talk specifically about 3 different companies or enterprises that have embraced CEBP and what it meant to them from an ROI standpoint, right?
Yeah. First in the survey, we found that 44% of respondents were looking at achieving business goals as one of their ROI objectives. But the 3 we have here, Global Crossing, they're now part of Level 3. They had a great documented case study from Microsoft talking about how they embedded Link inside of SharePoint for their RFP responses. So now, rather than having 14 different versions of the proposal being worked on simultaneously, they had one version and the ability right out of that to communicate with any other party who would be involved in the process. It not only cut their cost by 30%, but it also helped them get the versions under control. Marty Parker talks about a case he's familiar with, dealing with a mortgage company where they really did the CEBP process. They looked at how the loans were being processed and identified the particular points in that process where the machine ground to a halt. And it generally had something to do with communications. And by addressing the communication functions there, they found they were able to increase their loan capacity by 30,000 loans a year without adding another person in the staff. The branch bank example I cite there at the end, as I recall, this was Toronto Dominion Bank, where instead of having specialists go out to spend 1 day a week at each of 5 different branches, they started putting video kiosks in the branch and used video conferencing to allow any prospective customer to deal with that specialist immediately. So it can be done. Certainly we've seen tons of CEBP examples with real hard ROI in task work. We do a lot of this mobility, putting barcode scanners on forklifts, and we're looking at fewer mistakes, faster inventory turnover. But the real challenge here is the conundrum of the knowledge worker. How do we measure productivity with the knowledge worker? So it might be that we're still going to have to be looking at soft dollars or faith to justify a real CEBP initiative. Hardy?
Yep. But I will add that, in many cases where we've worked with customers and, what started off as an infrastructure refresh or a centralization initiative quickly moves into, some sort of problem solution around a specific business process that for years has been, if you will, hobbled by some of the legacy infrastructure. And, of course, that's the beauty of software, is you can put it on top of this stuff and write integrations to databases, et cetera, and away you go with some really interesting CEB-type applications. And we actually do a webinar on this about, every other month or so. So it's an area that some of you might be interested in attending relative to specific CEBP. And moving on to slide 20. Oh, sorry, I don't have a slide number here. I can't see it. But moving on to the next slide, this just highlights, as I mentioned before, our focus is really, in addition to obviously supporting sort of horizontal type CEBP applications at the enterprise level. We're very focused on delivering solutions both in three of our core verticals: healthcare, education, and government. And these are just, again, we won't spend any time on it today, but these are some really good examples of things we've done whereby we're stitching together disparate infrastructure with, meaning communication infrastructure with disparate databases to deliver an enhanced business process.
Mm-hmm. And it looks like, Eric, we have another survey coming up.
We have one last polling question here. The question is, who is the primary champion for your UC deployment within your enterprise? Is it the telecom person, the CIO or IT manager, somebody more on what we used to think of as the data side? Is it the CTO or someone in their operation, or is it the CEO, somebody kind of above all of them? And we'll give you just a few quick seconds to do that. It's interesting. I was looking over some of the sets of registrants that we have for the Enterprise Connect conference in March in Orlando, and I have seen more of these folks coming in with a title that has unified communications in it. Coming out on the other side of some of these descriptions, we're starting to see people who are the unified communications manager, unified communications architect, something like that.
Yeah, I'm waiting to see what the answers are to this one as well, because we asked the same question at Web Tutorials. We didn't split out CTO from CIO, but we found that the CIO, IT manager, or CTO was the champion 61% of the time. It was 13% for the telecom director. So I'm interested to see if this is going to match up to what we've seen, where basically it is clearly UC has moved out of the telecom realm and into the IT realm. We also found about 8% of the time it was CEOs.
I'm sorry, what did you say? I'm sorry, Michael. What percent?
We also found 8% of the time it was CEOs, but CIO, CTO dominated with 61%.
Well, I know in the case of IBM, I mean, the CEO of IBM is really driving the whole adoption of social business within IBM, which of course is flowing through everything they're doing. So it's not surprising that there's a measurable amount of CEO interest in this, I would say, is the way I would say it. Yeah. And as far as the telecom piece, I mean, I think as we all know, I mean, telecom as a distinct, this is higher, but still telecom is as you know, is in many cases reports to the CIO now, whereas it might have been something separate in perhaps the past. So it's clearly moving towards an IT-centric solution. So.
It looks like Eric's got the answers out there for us, and
yes, you do, sir.
And Senator McGovern looks pretty close to what we found. If you combine CIO and CTO, we're up to 66%.
Interesting. Okay, great. Well, let's move on to our final myth. And of course, we don't mean it that way, but just controversial topics. So, is Link my PBX replacement, or will Link be my PBX replacement? So, I think it's worthwhile on the first slide to sort of do an assessment of how Microsoft's doing. As I'm sure all the audience knows, Microsoft has now been in the UC space for quite some time. Eric, I can't recall when the first year was they had a keynote, but it's been at least, 5-6 years now, maybe.
Quite a while, yeah.
Yeah, and there's some interesting data here. Michael, let me just take the middle one because that one I'm familiar with. And I think, from our perspective, again, with as many customers we have and with as disparate of infrastructure they have, we have seen a significant increase, obviously, in Link activity and inquiry, and it's principally still to this day, from our perspective, and I think these numbers validate it, in the middle box, and so I'm curious to get your interpretation of your numbers because they're obviously quite different. Is that it is moving forward? It's been deployed. And customers are trying to figure out how to stitch Link in with their existing infrastructure. They want to have a seamless sort of, call control experience with both Link and their incumbent voice solutions. And at some point in the future, they may move towards the all Link sort of, deployment of as if it's, a PBX. But clearly these numbers would, and clearly they're moving up the needle's moving here. It's 5% that was going to use Link as their IPPBX in 11, and the 12 survey had moved up to over 10% and 11%. So that's interesting. How does that relate, Michael, from your perspective to the percentages you had in your survey?
Yeah, this is actually one response that frankly set both Steve Taylor and I back on our heels when we saw it. There was 28% today and 39% in the future that looked at Microsoft for enterprise voice. But we thought about it. By the way, there was also another 44% who said they would never consider Microsoft anytime for voice anytime soon. Our take on it, because when you look at market research from organizations like MZA, Microsoft's in the other category. That's less than 3%. However, the way we worded our question, this is always the challenge comparing between two different surveys. The way we asked the question, if you had one user with using Microsoft Link for voice, you could answer yes. So I think the percentage we're seeing that doesn't necessarily say that they're yanking out the PBX in favor of a Microsoft Link solution. But it was still surprising that this many of the respondents were actually actively involved in Microsoft Link for voice. So it was a surprise for us as well.
So are you interpreting that the 28% have deployed Link in some shape or fashion and they're playing with it? Or I don't use the term playing; they're piloting it. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
But it certainly does not appear from what I've seen that 20% of the PBX lines out there today are actually on Microsoft Link. It's nowhere close.
Yeah, we haven't seen that market share type number in any of the surveys I've seen. So,
yeah.
Let's move on to the next slide. So, I think this does highlight, though, that, and it is, really a couple of different, we talked about this a little earlier, there are clearly two very different ways that Microsoft's going to market with UC. And, of course, the acquisition of Skype, I think further adds to that opportunity and, potentially complexity. But, the bottom line is that, of course, their email, Exchange and its cloud twin, if you will, Office 365 has been, Exchange, of course, has been deployed very broadly and adopted, and I believe Office 365 will really start to see some real traction on the SMB side, then possibly moving up into the enterprise. Link as an instant messaging or presence client is very widely deployed as well. And as what Michael was saying, and I would agree with, is that we have not yet seen Link as the enterprise voice engine, if you will, or PBX replacement. None of the market share would indicate that is in fact the case. Although, as I think as Michael's statistics indicate, roughly a third of the market is piloting it and testing it. So it's very much it's very significant, both on the some of the more collaboration type application side as well as the voice side. Michael, did you have anything on that?
Just say that Cisco is also making a pretty good stab at instant messaging and presence. Microsoft led the way on that one at 58% of future plans, but Cisco fairly close behind at 53%. But I really see that as shaping up as a two-horse race, because number 3 on IM and presence was Avaya, and they came in with 17%. So it's Microsoft and Cisco and pulling away from the pack.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of focus around, of course, federation around this stuff, as you know, Michael. I mean, it's because of that sort of intersection, what you just described, where there's multiple clients and multiple presence potential sources. Federation is a big opportunity we see in the market. So on the next slide, just as a highlight what we're doing in the area, we clearly have developed solutions that link, no pun intended, link to the existing infrastructure. And again, I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but that's a big focus for us in that area. And then, of course, also on the messaging side, which is one of our core areas of legacy strength. We've done a lot of work with we've had with Exchange for literally probably 20 years now. And of course, we just announced Office 365 full integration earlier this week. So areas of focus for us, clearly Microsoft has a very strong presence in the space, and we're looking for ways that we as a company can partner with them as well as add value to our enterprise accounts.
And one of the questions that came in that I think is an interesting one is, what role in this, Michael, this is something you work on a lot, obviously, what role will the wireless carriers play in supporting all of this UC?
Well, it's always a difficult one to call with the mobile operators because they are so focused on the consumer market, where in unified communications, this is an enterprise buy. Though increasingly we're seeing a great overlap between the capabilities we have in being added for communications and social network applications with what we have in UC. Actually, one of the things I'm watching very closely now with the carriers is the Rich Communication Service, or Rich Communication Suite, which is a multi-operator plan to have things like enhanced directory, presence, I see what you see. We have a lot of these capabilities, but it's just the iPhone users get it, or just the BlackBerry users get it. But that sort of across-the-board, all-carrier UC capability. Keep an eye on that rich communication suite. That could be the thing that really gets the mobile operators into this game.
Hardy, what about? I mean, you talked about the cloud here earlier in the session, and a lot of people talk about the cloud in terms of supporting, a user base that's mobile some of the time and not mobile some of the time, and wants sort of the same experience on different devices all the time, and maybe thin clients. How do you see that all maybe working?
Yeah, that's an interesting opportunity. We put a lot of work into that. Clearly there's a desire by the enterprise to have sort of a separate experience, to not mix enterprise and, if you will, individual data. And of course, as you end up with a BYOD type, bring your own device type scenario in a lot of enterprises, it becomes even more of an area of focus. So I can tell you that is a big area of focus, and I think all the vendors are working real hard to try to deliver solutions that can help with that. I'm sure Michael actually has probably even more input on that than me.
Oh, I think you covered it pretty well, Hardy.
All right, well, and it's a good thing because we're just about at the top of the hour, so I'm going to just push out a final slide on AVST there for you, and let everybody know that if we didn't get to your questions, those will be something that we've got here on the back end, and that AVST will be able to follow up with you offline and make sure that your questions are answered, and everything that you're curious about, they're able to satisfy you on. Just remind you to take a look at these links, and we'd like to thank everybody for attending today's webinar. Again, this was the webinar called UC Mythbusters, Is Everyone Talking About the Wrong Things? Brought to you by Enterprise Connect, also known Jitter, AVST, and United Business Media, LLC. Shortly after this live event, we'll send you guys an email to remind you to access the presentation on demand, and encourage you to pass that along also to anybody you know who might be interested, who wasn't able to attend, or who didn't know about it in time to register, and encourage them to come in and listen to the replay. This webinar is copyright 2013 by United Business Media. The presentation materials are owned by, or copyright if that's the case, by Enterprise Connect and AVST, who are solely responsible for its content, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. So on behalf of our guests, Hardy Myers, President and CEO of AVST, and Michael Finneran, Principal of DBRN Associates, thanks for your time, and have a great day.